Do you see that? That's the real world. For just about all of human history, if you wanted a job, you had to work out there. But in the past few decades, a little thing called the internet has changed all that. In barely a generation, we've seen the rise of dozens of new career paths that anyone can theoretically aspire to. YouTuber, podcaster, independent author, Instagram model, Twitch streamer, the list goes on and on. Sometimes these are all lumped together under the label influencer, but that's so broad as to be meaningless. I've been on YouTube nearly 10 years now, as an amateur, a professional, and now a semi-pro. I have lots of thoughts and opinions about what the industry is like. Others have different thoughts and opinions though, so I decided to ask them, why is YouTube? Hello, internet people. I don't have much of an intro for this one, but this is Hello Future Me, so say hello, Hello Future Me.
Hello, hi, I'm Hello Future Me. That's how often my emails start. People send it to me going, hello, hello, future me. But yeah, I run the YouTube channel, Hello Future Me, but you can call me Tim. That is my name.
How would you describe your channel? How would you describe what it is you do and what you create?
I typically describe myself as making educational content online, specifically about writing and world building. And I also talk about Avatar: The Last Airbender. That tends to be kind of how I frame it to people. It's a lot easier to sort of people sort of like understand it if you go, I make educational stuff. They just kind of like put that in the box of things they already know, for the most part. That tends to be how I sell it.
How many videos do you think you have where you don't mention Avatar?
So that's actually a bit of an interesting question because when I first started out, it was actually like I made a lot of Avatar videos and then I started making educational content. And as part of that transition, I would often play those two things together. I'd talk about magic systems, and what would I talk about? I talk about Avatar's magic system. And that transition meant that I would build an audience which kind of like used the audience I already had, but found new people. And I got to talk about something that I really loved. Um, so for the it was a bit of a running joke for a long time on the channel that I would always reference Avatar. Um, since probably 2 or 3 years ago, that has declined. There are a couple of complex reasons for that, but the number of videos that I specifically mention Avatar, I couldn't tell you. I think I have like 300 videos or something like that. I don't know what my exact stats are, but I would say that there's a decent chance that around 100 of them probably mention Avatar or something like that. That would be my bet.
Well, there's worse shows to reference.
There are worse shows to reference. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's the thing. It's like fundamentally what makes YouTube magical is that it's people talking about things they like, or at least that is the impression that people have, like how YouTube became magical in the first place. And I like Avatar. I like Lord of the Rings. I like talking about the Elder Scrolls. I like these stories, which have left an impact on me.
When you first started on YouTube, were you planning on doing this as a career?
Um, yes and no. Yes, in the sense that like I was a try everything kid. I tried a million things that could give me some sort of creative outlet, to just see if it worked, you know? I was really young and I was like doing freelancing and I was doing um I ran a jewelry shop at one point. I tried to like sell muesli bars. I mean, those weren't necessarily creative, but the point is I tried everything. And at one point I was kind of like, okay, I'm going to give YouTube a try. And I tried that for 60 videos. I don't think it's right to say like I wanted to do it as a career because I think if you're trying to do, if you're trying to like go into YouTube or a creative industry as a whole, like purely as a career, like financially minded, looking for security, that's just a terribly bad approach. Um, and you will burn out over that because in the end, you're not going to enjoy it. So you've got to enjoy it for what it is in the first place, really. Um, and so I made like 60 videos, which were just me kind of like screwing around and none of them worked. None of them, they all flopped. I got like I think the most like 300, 500 views or something like that. And then the very last video I ever made popped off. And uh that with that one popping off, I came back and I started making more stuff like that, and then it popped, and then I started doing it as a career. So from that point on, I was like, yeah, I really want to do this as a career, but it didn't really start to be this thing of like, okay, this is what I want to make my future in like a very deliberate sense, rather than me just sort of like making things for the fun of it until I made educational content. Once I started making educational content, I was like, this is what I want to do. Not just because it's fun, not just because I find meaning in it, but because I feel like I'm like providing something that's of real value, to other people.
Can we rewind to the part where you said you owned a jewelry shop?
No, what I did was I found this like I was like 17 or something like that. I didn't have much money, right? I was 17 years old. Who has money at 17? But I had enough that I could like there was a site called like bids.com. And basically it was like discarded jewelry that jewelry shops didn't want that for some reason fell through the cracks. And they all started at a $1 bidding um thing. So you could bid on a piece of jewelry like a ruby necklace for like $1. And if you were really lucky and if you just stuck around and you kept on bidding on things, you would get like a necklace for like $5 or like $8 or something like that. And then I would take that, I would ship it home, and then I would resell it as at a higher price. Um, I'm not sure I'd necessarily like it didn't go anywhere. I didn't make any money in the end. I did it for a few months and I was just like losing money. Um, there's a reason that I guess these jewelry pieces didn't end up in stores or anything like that. But I liked jewelry. I still like jewelry. I love gemstones and I love that sort of thing. I've always loved just like pretty stones. I've got a collection of them, and so like having something to do with them was always like kind of attractive to me. I don't wear much jewelry. My only real jewelry is my wedding ring, but uh yeah, I did that for a little bit. And it was fun. It was fun, but it was never going to work out.
I'm sorry, I just heard you say that, and I was like, okay, let's put a pin in that. We need to get back to that at some point.
It's a weird thing. I mean, I've tried a million weird things. I remember basically remaking the muesli bar and thinking as a kid that I was going to be like a world-renowned chef. So I was like, I put like honey and oats and whatever inside a bowl and then mashed it together and then I made bars and I was like, oh my goodness, this tastes amazing. I'm gonna sell this and people's gonna call me like the muesli man or something.
Could you please walk me through the creation of your content? So, from conception all the way to release, what does that look like for you?
I mean, I think every creator would say this, and it entirely depends on the nature of the video. Or potentially I would say potentially it's a little bit different for me because I have like categories of content that a lot of creators don't. You look at someone like, let's take Mr. Beast. His videos are for the most part like the same kind of video. Um, there's a lot of money involved. It's very fast paced, lots of people doing things, for in a competition of some kind. Um, and so like I'm sure he has like a system which is like can sort of apply to every video in a weird way. My videos can kind of broadly be divided into like writing, world building, avatar, and then like other. And like I did a video on Unit 731 and its war crimes. I did a video on Operation Titanic, which is like this time that the French bombed New Zealand, that no one would have heard of unless you're in New Zealand, basically. Certainly the French don't talk about it. And so like those videos are going to be just like in terms of how they're built, completely different to a what happened to Aang after the end of the show kind of video, like that sort of thing. But broadly speaking, if I'm talking about writing and world building, generally those would start with me kind of getting down all my thoughts with no research, kind of just like, what do I want to say about this that's purely coming from me, untainted by anything else I've seen or anything like that. Um, and then taking that and then sort of like doing a bit more deeper reading. So I go away and I read a bunch of sources and stories and things to kind of like build out my understanding of the topic, see if there's actually something here that I want to say, you know? Um, and then I basically start to build it out until it's an essay. Fundamentally, I write essays. My videos are for the most part structured like essays. They're structured like I would have written them in law school, pretty much. And then I make them sound nice. And by that I mean you make them sound like you're talking to a friend. You rewrite them. So I write them out very cold, raw, boring essay like, and then I write them as if you're sitting down and talking to a friend for the most part. Um, Sometimes a lot of what I talk about is like a bit abstract, and so a large part of it is finding the right stories to demonstrate that for an audience who might, how to actually communicate it. You need examples. You need the right references. And that's a very difficult journey because finding the right balance of sources is a really hard thing. You want them to be diverse, but you also want them to have different mediums, but you also want them to be both a mix of accessible and also like a bit more niche. You know, so on the one hand, I'm going to be using Lord of the Rings because people know that, and I don't have to explain it. But I'm also going to use Another Girl Under the Iron Bell by Angela Yu, which is a story about this girl that you never would have heard of. It's from Uncanny Magazine, right? And so balancing all those things at once is probably a big part of it, I'd say. And then once I've written that, for the most part, it's psyching myself up to film, which is my least favorite part of the process, and then handing that off to my editors. And my editors get a script. They get the script, and it's a Google Docs thing, which has comments on the side and saying, "Hey, here's the kind of visual." I've never been particularly editing oriented. But now I've actually got an artist as well who I will be like, "Hey, can you draw some assets for this part, these parts of the video?" And then the editors can insert those. Uh, and then it goes through a couple of review processes. So the editor will send me one, and then we use a site called frame.io, and I can put comments throughout the video. They make the edit, they send it back again. There might be a second round of edits. Sometimes there's a third round of edits, depending on the complexity of the video. If it needs to go off to a sponsor, I'll send that off. We get tips from them, approval, before it eventually gets uploaded and shared with patrons or Nebula first, and then later on the world. Pretty much. That's the gist. It's probably similar to yours. I don't know.
Nope, not at all. Your process is much more refined.
My
Well,
process
to be
is
fair,
just
to be fair, I've only had to refine it since I brought other people on to work with me.
oh,
When I was doing it on my own, it was a very chaotic, like, throw everything together. I would write in 2 days, film on the third, and then edit on the fourth and fifth, and would just like as best as I can hit that as however I can, and it was chaos for the most part. It's only because I brought other people on that I have to coordinate them, which means they have expectations about when there's going to be work and how it's going to work, and I have to manage them and coordinate them, and that's a whole other task in and of itself. And so now I
yeah.
have like a Notion platform where you can see where all the different videos are at in the production process.
Yeah, I think that YouTubers and podcasters and such that work with other people have to get more professional just because that's how you have to work with large groups of people. But those of us who work solo, we can just kind of do whatever we want.
Oh, well, that's the thing is that like at some point you realize that other people are depending on you, and um, that requires rhythm, to some extent. It means that you can't just sort of suddenly go, "Oh, I'm taking this week off," and also we're going to scrap that video, and also actually none of this matters, and we're just going to move on and do something else, and you have to think a bit more concretely about kind of what the video is going to look like if you have editors, because if I really wanted to on my own, I can basically just be like, all right, I'm gonna scrap half the video and re-edit it, that sort of thing. With editors, that's a significant financial investment. That is the potentially the time that a contractor might have allotted you, that they may not be able to provide, and they go, well, I can't do this until 3 weeks later. I don't have that problem because because of how I work with the people that I'm with. But that is something that you definitely have to consider if you are expanding. Um, and it's a thing. It's a whole thing. And I know for some people, editors don't work, but for me, the the essence has always been in the researching and the writing, more than the editing.
I've considered getting editors a few times just because I hate doing it, but I can't bring myself to do it for two reasons. One, once I do that, I'm giving up some level of control. And number two, once I do that, other people's livelihoods, other people's jobs depend on how my channel is doing, and that's just a lot of pressure.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fair. I mean, to be clear, I for the first like 2 years of my career, on YouTube, I edited on a free video editor with a broken tripod from my grandfather, on a camera that was 150 New Zealand dollars, which is 75 US dollars. Um, and I did that I made my thumbnails in PowerPoint. So like and then my friend Ellie, bless her, she's been fantastic. She learned I made thumbnails in PowerPoint. She's like, you make thumbnails in PowerPoint. You need to do something better. I'm like, it works for me. And I was like, no wonder they look so terrible. Uh, it was only when I really started to have a bit more capital behind the channel that I could even, support having an editor. Um, and it's only been very recently that I brought on an artist to help with thumbnails and someone to help me with researching. Um, it's something which you have to scale up very carefully.
Okay, the magic
Oh,
of
one
video
more note
editing.
about like editorial control. Sorry, I will say this. On the one hand, I've never really cared that much about the visuals. It's like always been for me a passionate thing that I've wanted to talk about, and so like the editing has kind of just been a chore. But I think for me, when I realized that editors could do the job far better than me, it actually meant that there was more creative freedom because they could do things that I could never even invest the time to learn how to do, but wished I could do, you know? And so like I can go to my editor and I can be like, hey, can you make a really cool, like, animated opening that like has all the words coming together? I don't know how to make that. I have no clue, but I wish I could. They know they can figure that out, and I think there's an extension of creativity in that.
Once you decided to pursue YouTube as a job, how long did it take for you to make enough money to support yourself?
So my channel took off when I was in year three of law school. So I was doing law school at the time that I started making my my channel.
Mhm.
Um, it was not viable until it was not viable. There was a chance that it was going to be viable basically in my final year of law school, and I sat down to myself. I was like, okay, I want this to be my job when I leave. So I'm going to invest more time into YouTube than is potentially wise when you're at law school. Um, and that's what I did. And so for my final year, I set aside a whole bunch of time to make it work. And so I left uni and then I basically transitioned into working this full time. That was a very easy, I had a very lucky transition. I never had that period of uncertainty, in large part because I was a student for that period, where I had a significant support government-wise and family-wise, helping me out during that period. And then 2017, I think it was 2017 was when it really was when I basically moved into doing it full time.
When you were going to law school, what were you planning on doing before you decided to do YouTube?
Well, a lawyer, I guess. I was doing two degrees at uni. So I was doing a law degree, but I was also doing an arts degree with a double major in English and political philosophy. So there were there were two sides. I really wanted to go and do public law. I wanted to go and do government law. I didn't want to be an MP. I liked the idea of being involved in public policy making, constitutional law, that sort of thing. It really interests me. I find the underpinnings of society that you don't necessarily see or think about, but are very important to how things work, like really interesting. There's no money in that, to be clear. Very little of any money, which means I probably would have ended up working in land law or corporate law or something like that. But I didn't. I've got lots of friends who did go on to do that, and they actually seem to love it. You know, so that would have been another world, and I often think about what life would have been like. But no, I lucked into something very beautiful.
So, how long are you planning on continuing on this path? Do you have an off ramp or retirement plan already set out?
Oh, spoilers to some extent. My end goal, and from the beginning, has always been like right from the start, right as soon as I knew that this was going to be a thing. I always believed that this was only a ramp off to being an author. That was always my goal. And I have been continually taking steps in that path for my career during this. So, I did the self-publishing thing with On Writing Word Building, volumes one, two, and three. I have published in a bunch of magazines professionally now, and that's just important for being in the industry. Really, you're not going to make money on that, but it is part of the industry, you know. Um, and I've got books kind of out with agents, that sort of thing, kind of seeing where that goes. I can't really talk about that too much, but the aim is, and you are correct, that a lot of YouTubers, the ones who really succeed are never just YouTubers. They are business owners, they are journalists outside of their YouTube channel, they are uh, people who have careers which are connected to their YouTube often enough, but not necessarily wholly dependent on it. And for me, that's going to be being an author. That's going to be where I'm going to end up, basically. It's not going to be an off-ramp in the sense that I'm going to stop doing YouTube because I don't think I would need to. Um, but it will change, I think, is probably the main thing. The thing about YouTube is that you need to constantly change. You need to constantly evolve. People who get stuck doing the same content for their entire life, for 10, 15 years, um, they struggle
Yeah.
because audiences move, and you can see that happen. And that's always been very apparent to me is that you need to evolve. And so, yeah, I mean, going off to be an author, but also evolving with the YouTube channel. Am I turning 60 and making YouTube videos? I mean, probably not. But we don't know what a 60-year-old YouTuber looks like in the sense that you've been doing it for 45 years. We know at best what someone who's been doing this for 20 is like, and those are very rare.
Yeah. So the amount of content on the internet is constantly growing. So when you first started off, how did you manage to set yourself apart from the crowd? And how does that differ from how you set yourself apart from the crowd today?
So there are three answers to this. When I first got my start, it was from How to Train Your Dragon videos. Um, if you didn't know, it's How to Train Dragon, the kids film series.
Mhm.
I made a video basically saying, "Hey, what happened to the Night Furies? Why is there only one?" Um, and I didn't really know it at the time, but I was capitalizing on a massive audience that didn't have people creating stuff for them, in large part because they were children. Um, and because there is a massive How to Train Your Dragon community, but for the most part, they were not old enough or quite in the industry enough to be making content themselves. Um, and even in 2016, that was still a period where I think we hadn't quite hit the professional entry rate that you see a lot more of now, where, to kind of get your start on YouTube in the first place, you kind of need to be a lot more professional from the outset.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it's lucky, so much of it is the right place, right time. And I made videos for an audience who didn't have people making content for them. I then moved on and I did the same for Avatar. People weren't really making Avatar videos on YouTube when before I started making them. There were a couple. I don't want to pretend they don't exist or anything like that. But there certainly weren't people making them on the scale that I was and the kind that I was. Those really popular old videos, which are like theory videos and like lore videos. Like you saw
Yeah.
them with like um, uh, like Pixar theories and Lord of the Rings theories or Star Wars theories, that sort of thing. That sort of content was very popular at the time, but no one was making that for Avatar, basically. And so I did. I made that because I really wanted to, and I liked that, and I had thoughts, and I'm like, why is no one making content like this? So in that sense, that's what set me apart. I was making content that no one else was making for the most part. And again, there will have been other people, but they weren't as visible as many of these other, other kind of um, fandoms and communities. And I was lucky enough to kind of be there and have that opportunity, have that opening. Um, so those things. And I've always been in the opinion, it's the same with any industry. You've either got to do something new or you've got to do something better. Those were, for the most part, doing something new, I think. Um, in terms of my educational content, um, I think personally, and this is what people have sort of told me, is that I really try to be more in depth with my writing and world building content. You know, um, I tend to, take quotes from like books and stories and really dig deep and analyze them. I tend to try and go a little bit deeper than uh, sometimes some videos do around these topics. And that's mostly just because I'm passionate about it. Like I've always loved analyzing fiction. I've always loved kind of like understanding why things are written the way that they are written, why worlds are the way that they are. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that that is probably what attracts people to it for the most part. Um, I don't want to brag and I don't want to like make myself out to be more than I am or anything like that. But people tend to tell me that they like the depth of the videos.
I think on YouTube, any sort of talking about fiction, whether it's books or movies or whatever, most of the people talking about that only go surface level. So if you go below that even a little bit, anyone doing that is going to stand out.
Yeah, I mean, there's especially now, there's definitely a lot of quite surface level stuff out there. I mean, and that's always going to be the case, you know. There are surface level journalism and there's in-depth journalism. There's surface level writing and there's in-depth writing. Um, there's surface level science content and in-depth science content, and all of those are to some extent both going to have audiences because people like some more casual stuff. But I do think that the more in-depth stuff is really essential and really important. And for me personally, I wanted to make educational stuff just more accessible. I wanted to make it more available to people. I was at university at the time when I was making these videos first, and I was kind of like, I want to bring these discussions to online for free. And that's always been really important to me because I think education is just one of the most important things that you can have in your life. It is one of the greatest indicators of someone's capacity to succeed, to raise their living standards, to, you know, to elevate their life basically. And making it free, making it accessible is just so important to that.
How would you say YouTube has changed since you first began?
That's yeah. Everyone's going to argue over this. I suppose everyone's going to have very different opinions. The big thing is TikToks. I guess TikTok was an earth-shattering shift in how people consume content, not as competition. People often think of it as competition. It's not. It's not. TikToks are advertising. That's what they are fundamentally. People who make shorts are using that as a foot in the door to get to more people because you can get your work in front of the eyes of more people, and then you have to use that to get people to go watch your other stuff where you actually can make money. Because TikTok, that's a whole complicated thing, but financially it's just not viable for most people. It doesn't have the money, and fundamentally the reason for that is that advertising rates are just way too low on a 20-second TikTok or a 60-second TikTok. The money is in longer form content. And it's also in, I mean, fundamentally, parasocial relationships, which are much harder to develop in the TikTok medium. So there's that element where we've had to cater to that to some extent. The ecosystem as it is expects you to be able to accommodate people in those circles. So that's one change. But I think that the bigger change is that you have to have a certain level of professionalism to start in the first place now. Even back in 2016, people were saying this about when I was starting, they were saying that now you need to be really professional. Compared to 2010 or something where people would sit in front of their camera in their lounge with no lighting or anything like that. Um, but now you will see a lot of channels popping up and growing popular who have really sophisticated graphics teams, who have really sophisticated, sound design, who have really sophisticated. I mean, they start what are basically game shows or reality shows, on YouTube. And that's a whole different scale to where I felt I was starting, which was maybe a bit more professional than 2010, but still fundamentally a person sitting in front of a camera.
Yeah, yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, I don't think I've changed that much since I started on YouTube. I am still fundamentally a person in front of a camera, but I've improved things like lighting and sound. I mean, I don't know how people put up with some of my sound in my early videos.
That's everyone always says, what's the one, how do you get started? And I'm sure you would agree the one thing you need is good quality audio. You have to have good quality audio now. That is the base minimum. You can film on a potato, sort of, but you have to have good quality audio. I mean, podcasts are big for a reason. I mean, I am under no delusion that to believe that everyone watches all of my stuff the entire time. I think for the most part, people listen a lot of the time. They just put their phone on the table and they listen. And I know that because I do that. I don't watch half the people that I watch. I listen to them.
How do you describe what you do to people? Do you just come out and say you're a YouTuber, or do you have some sort of cover story?
I no, I mean, I'm not ashamed of doing. There's a little shame. No, no. I definitely don't front load with YouTube because people think Jake Paul. People think that sort of person. There is definitely an association with the term YouTuber that I think speaks to like people just don't realize how big YouTube is. They don't realize the diversity of content on there.
Yes.
Um, and so there's a lot of stereotypes at play. So what I typically do is I say I create educational content, typically to do with writing and world building on YouTube. And people go, "Oh, okay, that's really cool." And I say, "Yeah, with an edge towards like sci-fi and fantasy." And they go, "Oh, that's great," you know. That tends to be basically what I tell people. Although more and more these days, I tend to introduce myself as an author, I guess. And I mean that's in large part because like that is a whole other side of my career. I am I don't tend to talk about it that much on my channel, but a substantial portion of my income comes from that and work behind the scenes, which isn't televised for the world to see.
Have you ever been recognized in public? And that's not counting things like a convention or a fan meetup where people are expecting to meet you.
Oh, right. Yes. Yeah. No, that's happened a fair amount of time. A few times in New Zealand, not often. There's not that many people in New Zealand, and there's not that many people on the South Island where I live. There's only 1 million people on the South Island where I live, and there's only 300,000 people or 400,000 people in the city where I live. So, given that only like 1.4% of my audience is from New Zealand, there's not going to be a great crossover there. But when I came to the UK, when I came to Europe, and when I went to America, I definitely bumped into a lot of people just on the streets. The most awkward one was I was at Utah Airport, and I was unpacking my stuff to redistribute weight, and I was literally like getting out my underwear and jockeys and stuff like that. And a guy came up to me and started talking to me. It was really nice. I've always had fantastic interactions with people who have followed me. They've all been just incredible, wonderful people. Um, I met one just recently in Edinburgh, a couple in Edinburgh. Um, but yeah, a few at home. And then yeah, a bunch of cons and stuff where I have said people aim, but yeah, there's been a bunch in public as well.
So, does your social life have a lot of overlap with your professional life, or would you say those are separate spheres?
For a long time, there was not much overlap, and the reason for that being that there's not really many New Zealand YouTubers. Um, Meeting people in the job is not easy if you're not near where the people are, and most of people are American. Most people are European. At least ones that I would be able to converse with easily, and that would be in spheres that I know. Um, and So for a long time, I didn't really meet many people. There were a couple, but not many. However, I have become really close friends with a handful of them recently, and a few of them were even came to my wedding, which was really, really nice.
I know what you mean. For the first couple years I was doing this, was just kind of doing my own thing. I didn't really try to reach out to other people or network or anything. But since then, I have reached out to more people, and now I have some acquaintances online and stuff. And I don't know if this totally fits, but I recently found out that someone I went to high school with is also a YouTuber, and he's more than double my size. And I didn't hear about this. No,
Does that
literally.
like is that like a little bit salty for you? You're like, I
Yes.
landed this, and I'm not even the biggest one.
Yes, yes, I am salty. His channel is called Offhand Disney. Like, you can go check it out. And I went to high school with that guy. Somewhere out there is a picture of me riding on his back when I was 18. And I found out about that. I was like, oh, good for him, but also, oh, come on.
Oh,
And
I found him.
yeah, he's more than twice my size, and I knew that guy. And the two of us aren't even the only minor internet celebrities from my high school that I went to school with. Because another guy that was a year older than me that I knew is now a rapper, and he seems to be doing okay for himself. Yeah,
I
his.
don't know. I don't know anyone famous from my year at school. There. I mean, there was only like 100 of us, but yeah,
Yeah,
I don't. I,
my school,
I don't remember anyone.
my school wasn't that big either. So the fact that three of us
I mean,
all
it's
kind of made
incredible.
it.
Hey, you gotta clearly like that school must be doing something because they've got some high
Uh,
performers or
all three of
creative
us,
individuals.
all three of us were in the same theater program, so I guess our theater program was pretty good.
Yeah, that's the theater program, right? Yeah, yeah. No, that is funny. That is funny. That is quite funny.
Yeah.
I don't have anything quite like that, I'm afraid.
It's fine. It's just something I needed to get out. Actually invited him on here, but he never got back to me, so rip.
Wow. You just like if have you got him on like Facebook?
Nah, nah, I don't. I just sent him an email. I could maybe message him on Instagram or something, but that would feel a little desperate at this point.
I did have one time that I was hanging out with a friend of mine and we're going through the supermarket to go to the movies or something like that. And he's like one of my best friends. And we bump into one of his friends. And he goes, "Oh, yeah, hey man, what?" He's talking to my friend there and he goes, "Hey, how you going?" And then he does a double take and he's like, "You know him? How do you know him?" And it's like, "Yeah, it's like this is Tim." That was quite funny. Because sometimes like my friends don't realize that they know me. And that's always a bit interesting, a bit funny.
One of my friends is a really big fan of yours, and this was a couple of years ago. He just mentioned something about you, and I was like, oh yeah, that's him. Like, he just didn't realize that, oh yeah, I know that guy.
Yeah, it's funny when that happens because like it's such a small world all the time, especially in New Zealand.
So how would you describe your relationship with your fans?
I mean, I, I don't know. It's it's difficult, right? Because to some extent, you can't have like a relationship with a group of people in a sense. And that might sound a bit strange, but like I'm not quite sure how you can have a relationship with like a large group of people where the dynamics between the individuals and between those individuals and you would all be incredibly unique, you know. Um, I I I have really loved meeting every single person that I've been lucky enough to meet. It's been really incredible for me because for the most part, like I just never had that available to me, to be able to meet people who watch my stuff. And so when I got to, it was really magical. I think it's I think it's more likely that I have a relationship to some extent with people in my audience that I may not necessarily understand than it is that I have like one relationship with 1.1 million people, I suppose. Um, yeah, like I try my best to sort of like understand what the crowd wants and things like that, but that's a guessing game for the most part. Yeah. I do talk to, I guess, my community and my Discord and stuff like that. But again, that's like a very small kernel of the total audience.
What's your favorite thing that's happened as a result of starting this job?
Uh, that is really hard to answer. Being able to meet Christopher Paolini was quite unusual because I worshipped him as a kid, and he's such a lovely man. Being able to meet Brandon Sanderson was incredible because again, he is such a lovely man. Being able to meet Adrian Tchaikovsky, such a lovely man. These are incredible people. Even having the opportunity to do that, you know, um, is probably the sort of like luckiest I've felt around that. But on the other hand, like my career has led me to go to places like Worldcon, which is the Hugos, that's a writing con. And I got to go there and I got to meet incredible people. Um, and not necessarily super famous, but like, they're editors at publishing houses and they're agents and they all do incredible, amazing stuff and be able to hear them. And I would never have gone to this place unless I was in this career, I guess is the point. I think that's probably the thing. But I think on a more personal level, the fact that I can write something and then know that other people are going to be excited to read it is one of the most magical things that any creative person can ever have the blessing to receive, you know. Um, I am so lucky that I'm not screaming into the void, or if I am, that it screams a little bit back at me, you know.
Yeah, when I was about 15, I wrote and published a couple of stories on Fiction Press, and I've spoken about them a little bit on my channel, so people have, gone out and read them, and, I don't think they're very good, but, like, they're out there. People have looked at them, people have read them.
This is one interesting thing about like being in the creative industries and being a very public person is that like people have like a very their idea of you is built up of kind of like everything that you've put up online, but they have no real gauge as to when that stuff is being published. They don't tend to have like a timeline of how you've evolved, either creatively or like intellectually or personally, which means that you know that to some extent they've got their own kind of very personal understanding of you made up of like the videos are from 2017 that they watched, but then immediately they went and watched videos of 2021, and then they went and read the story that you wrote in 2015, and then they went and watched your latest video in 2025, and like this all creates like a really weird concept of you, you know.
You're a different person at each of those stages.
Yeah, we're all different people at all different times in our lives.
What is the strangest thing that you have done or found as a result of this job?
In some sense, the strangest things is also the most beautiful. So in some, it would be my exact same answers that I just came before. Like it's the strangest feeling to meet those authors, but it's also the most beautiful. Strange can also be a negative thing in the sense that it's a very strange experience to feel like your work is can be can be distilled into a couple of numbers, and those numbers are the most important thing about something that you've created. And it's very hard to escape that feeling. So that's a strange feeling. Especially when there's a big blurred line between kind of like who you are and what you're creating, you know, in like your work. And so in some sense, those numbers become a reflection of you in a way that, maybe if I was a lawyer, my case numbers might not be a reflection of me. Um, but strangest, um, I've had some weird emails,
Yes.
probably. But
Yeah.
no, that's always
It's to be
a little
expected,
bit
I think.
odd. Yeah, yeah. Um, there's been a few strange emails from time to time. I can't think of anything concrete that I'd be like, yeah, that was bizarre. I think that videos taking off and being seen by millions of people is the most bizarre thing a human can experience.
So, what are your favorite and least favorite parts of this job?
Depends how broadly you define it. Very narrowly, my least favorite part is filming. I've never liked filming, and I notice that my brain like finds ways to avoid filming, and so, until I have to do it. And then my most favorite part, my favorite part of it has always going to be kind of analyzing stories, I guess. Um, Kind of like more broadly, though, my least favorite part is how sometimes your analytics can make you feel about yourself, and how your self-worth and your self-esteem and your kind of uh, contribution to others in the world can kind of become invisible behind a couple of downward red or gray arrows. Um, But then my favorite part of it is that I am fortunate enough that I can create things which mean something to me and that others are interested in seeing. I think that itself is always going to be the most profound part of it for me.
Yeah, I don't think anyone actually likes YouTube analytics. I know that there are some people who claim that they can glean some sort of information from them, but it honestly feels like they're just cutting open a bird and looking at its entrails. I don't think anyone actually gets anything out of YouTube analytics. You know what I'm saying?
Um, I'm not sure I'd go that far. Like if you're referring to like reading bird entrails as kind of like
I'm saying it doesn't give you any actual useful information.
YouTube gives you a lot of information. It gives you a lot of data. And so some of it's going to be more relevant than others. Um, I've I've always been a big proponent that you have to look at the trends more than specifics. So if you're wondering how healthy or unhealthy your channel is, you need to be looking at which things have been going up or down for the last 3 months, you know, rather than like whether this video itself performed poorly. Because a video has to perform poorly relative to others. That's always going to be the case. The trend's always going to be the most important part. It can be very it can be very hard if you wrap yourself up in the data though too much, and it can become obsessive, definitely. Uh, but I also think that sort of ignoring the data is is probably not going to help in the long run. You know, businesses have to work with data. Um, and if you're doing it as a career, at some point you have to understand the numbers behind what you're doing. At least until, you're successful enough that the numbers are largely irrelevant. You know.
Do you agree or disagree with the following statement? In entertainment, most of the work happens before the cameras start rolling.
Um, does that apply to Twitch streamers?
I
Well, yes,
no,
because they're often watching someone else's work.
a
So,
lot of them, yeah. It's I don't know.
so
I've done live streams. I understand the desire to just check out and not do anything after a while.
um, yes. I'm not sure there's like, yeah. I mean, if you're producing stuff, then yeah, most of the work is done before the cameras start rolling. I mean, like mathematically, I can look at this and I can be like, oh, I've got a 3 week research period for this video, 1 day filming, and then there's a 2 to 3 week editing period for this video. Like I can look at it like that, I guess, and I can be like, well, it's actually sometimes the work comes after the cameras have stopped rolling. but most of the work is not going to be while the cameras are rolling. I will definitely say that. In my opinion, the most important work does come beforehand in the writing and the researching. And that's in large part because that's going to be your foundation. You know, anything that goes on top of that is either going to work or crumble because of what you've got there.
A lot of businesses are reliant on whales, that is, a small number of customers that just spend a lot of money on you. Would you say your business model is reliant on whales?
No. In fact, I have cut down. I had a one patron tier where people could, if they wanted to, um, in fact, it wasn't even that much money, to be honest, but it was a significant step up from my other patron tiers. But I actually closed that because even though people were taking it up, I didn't like the idea of like pinning myself, I guess, to these too many times. No, my business is mostly dependent on the number one, large numbers of viewers. I don't want to say large numbers of viewers, I just mean the viewers really, but hopefully many of them watching the videos and people buying books, and people supporting on Patreon, which are going to be for the most part small numbers. Yeah, no, whales are not really a big part of my job.
What would you say is the biggest difference between your job and a regular job?
I'm lucky enough that my job is fun for me. I mean that seriously. Like I have pretty much all my friends. Um, a significant number of them have to do jobs which they don't love, which they work because they, uh, because they have to. What's the phrase? You work to live, don't live to work, you
Hmm.
know. And I'm not gonna lie, there are parts of my job which are uniquely stressful. Um, but at the same time, there are parts which are uniquely fortunate. And I'm incredibly fortunate that I even had this job in the first place. And the fact that I want to like keep doing this and invest more of my time and invest more of myself in it, I think is a big difference between this and a lot of jobs. I also do have friends who love their job. You know, I've got friends working in green industries and lawyer friends who love what they're doing and stuff like that. Um, but I have a job which is a perfect marriage between my creative expression and my career, my ability to sustain myself. And not many jobs give people that, I suppose is the main thing.
Would you say that in the past there would be some sort of equivalent to this job that you could find in traditional media, or would you say that this is pretty much just something you could do on YouTube?
I mean, like everything's got a lineage, right? Like YouTube has its lineage in a mixture of kind of like tabloid writing in like online journalism, in talking head TV shows, reality TV. There's a significant amount of reality TV that influences YouTube, like um then of course, like if I look at my job as like a teacher, well, yeah, there's a huge amount of tutoring jobs and professorships and stuff that teach writing and word building. The main distinction, I would say, is because of the nature of the internet, which is incredibly decentralized and widespread, it means that anyone can access a large enough audience to sustain one person, for the most part. And that's usually done through like niches. Like if I opened up a job right now in my home, um, where I taught writing and word building through a sci-fi and fantasy lens, there may not be enough people to sustain me doing that. But the internet, through its nature, and YouTube as kind of a platform in that, it means that I can. And there's a lot of jobs which do that. But again, this is just kind of like a fragmentation of the industries which came beforehand. In the sense that, when they first started out, you had to have really, really big audiences to make it work. And then you got smaller and smaller ones as the economy grew and things like that. And to some extent, this is just like continuing that trend. The main difference is, of course, the internet. The internet fundamentally transformed everything. It meant that I could reach audiences. It meant that you can uh, sell books independent of large publishing houses. It means that you can take money directly from people supporting you through Patreon. It YouTube means that you can upload and video host without a huge studio. Um, so yeah, there are a lot of different lineages, I guess, that you could draw between different elements of my job. Um, but not necessarily ones where I feel like it'd be a perfect one-to-one that I would just walk away and go do that out in the industry, um, as it stands. Uh, the closest I would say is like author, which is a significant part of my job and is very much still what happens out there, you know.
If whatever niche you're creating in only appeals to, say, 1% of the population, back in the day it would have had to appeal to 1% of the population in whatever region or country you live in, whereas nowadays it's everybody. Like, I could have fans in Mongolia nowadays, and back in the day that wouldn't have been possible.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's the whole like 10,000 people, right? You just got to get 10,000 people, or like 1,000 people, or 2,000 people to be able to support you, you know, and you'll be able to make a living generally, depending on whatever factors. But it is the lowest number of people that anyone has ever needed to basically sustain themselves on the creative jobs that we are seeing here for the most part, I reckon, in basically history.
Would you recommend that other people try to enter this field, and why or why not?
Enter the field if you want to. It has to be because you want to, you know. It has to be because you feel like you want to create stuff, and it can't just be because you want to be a YouTuber. Like that's gonna be part of it, of course. It's not like, people don't make videos and they go, yeah, I want to be able to be on YouTube. I like that kind of impression of myself, that idea of myself. Like that's gonna be a part of it. But you always have to love what you're doing, before that, I guess. Um, in large part because there's a decent chance of failure. I remember there being a talk where a Google employee was talking to a bunch of creators and they said like most people have a 5-year life cycle. They said there's a decent chance that 5 to 6 years you have your rise and you fall. Most people don't make it beyond that. They said. And like so looking at it as a career, we don't even know what a 40-year YouTube career looks like. Like that just isn't a thing. Like we don't have them, you know. And so in that sense, again, like you've got to be looking at it for what it is, right? Some people see it as kind of this easy cut to kind of like a super creative job. And the beautiful thing is that it is one of the easiest routes to a creative job. It's never been easier. And I think that is amazing and magical and wonderful. I don't know how many people are actually like making a living professionally on YouTube, but it's not an insignificant number of people, and that's
No,
incredible. I think it's a great creative outlet. I think it's a fantastic thing, and you've got to want that, right? Um, but it's a bad idea to get into it if you think it's going to be making you money. Like that's basically the bottom line. And it's a bad idea if you want to get into it because you think it'll you know, be a long-term thing. I don't know if I will be a long-term thing, and I don't know if I will, continue to make money the way that I have been fortunate enough to.
I think I would add it's a good idea to get into it if you think you're going to be famous, because just the way the internet works, like you can be extremely famous within your niche, but you're completely
Yeah.
unknown outside of it.
I
So if
remember
you're
seeing
going
like
into
a
it as for fame,
YouTube like rewind or like a YouTube like, oh, look at all the biggest people. And I recognized like three of them, you
yeah,
know. There are people with 15 million subscribers that I've never heard of in my entire life, right? I I didn't even know who well, anyone. You get the idea, you know. It's you can be very famous within a small community, but entirely irrelevant outside of it.
If you were a different type of online content creator, like you weren't a YouTuber, what sort of content creator do you think you would be?
I don't even know what really other types there are. There's like what, Instagrammer,
Yeah.
TikToker?
Podcasters, that's one. Like YouTubers and podcasters are probably the biggest ones, but there's others.
Yeah, I've never been a podcast person, but I guess much of my content probably translates to podcasts very, very well, I suppose. I guess I'd go with that. Yeah. I've never been particularly good with Instagram and I've never really taken to TikTok that much, but dense informational stuff is my jig, so I guess I might go with that.
You know, I feel like for every website on the internet, there's someone who's found a way to make a living off of that. I don't know if there's
Hmm.
necessarily a lot of people who have done it, but there's someone.
Professional tweeter.
That's definitely a thing. There's 100% a thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's just dumb.
It's dumb, yeah. It's just that's the point I'm making. Like even if we can't necessarily think of
Hmm.
all these jobs, they definitely exist.
They do. Yeah, they do. They do.
The generic term for people like us is influencer. Do you call yourself an influencer?
No, it's also not really a term. Yeah, no, I don't really use the term, and I don't. People don't tend to refer to me that much as an. I associate the term influencer so much more with Instagram, basically.
So, it's time for the super special bonus question. Are you ready?
Oh, let's hit me.
Okay, so the United States is currently trying to isolate itself economically. How do you think this will affect New Zealand's orc exporting industry?
So, orc exporting industry?
Yeah, you know, like the guys that Sauron employs in his armies, like New Zealand exports a lot of those around the world. Like, how do you think this will affect your industry?
The temptation to become very political right now, because I'm very political privately, and I'm not particularly political publicly. But so I think that obviously the orc economy isn't necessarily dependent on exports to the United States alone. We export orcs all around the country, all around the world, obviously, primarily to the Netherlands, as well as Bulgaria, and also Namibia, oh, and Suriname. Those are our major exporting orc partners. And we will continue to breed the orcs as much as possible to serve the Dark Lord's needs. It's I think that industry is going to remain strong because there's always going to be a need for pure evil, militaristic laboring forces. I think, especially in the Netherlands. That you might not know this, but they're Gouda, all made by orcs, all made by orcs, by like violently punching the cheese or something.
Oh, okay.
Would you say the same for the Urukai?
The Urukai were like a one-time thing. We tried them out for a while. The exports just didn't really kind of like, but there wasn't really the demand, you know? People preferred kind of like cheaper orcs, basically.
Well, hello, future me. Thank you for coming by here. Take a moment to plug anything that you want to plug.
Oh, go read my books. Go read my books. On Writing World Building, volumes 1, 2, and 3. If you like fantasy and sci-fi, those are all educational textbooks. They're fantastic. They're in schools. Or read my fiction book, A Catalog for the End of Humanity, if you like awesome stories. That's all.
All right, and I still don't have a proper outro for this thing, but thanks for watching/listening, everybody, and I'll see you around.